Picture this. It's 3 a.m. in Washington. The war room lights are blazing. The president's top advisors are hunched over satellite imagery, trade intelligence reports, economic threat assessments. They're watching China. They're watching Russia. They're watching Iran. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is looking north. And that is exactly the way Canada wants it. Because right now, while America's most powerful minds are staring across two oceans, something extraordinary is happening 50 miles above the northern border. A quiet, methodical, billion-dollar campaign is underway. Not with missiles, not with cyber attacks, with trade policy, regulatory tricks, energy leverage, and a smile. I'm going to show you 7 of them today. And by the end of this video, you will never look at that border the same way again. This is the Oval Briefing, where we cover the global power moves the mainstream media is too comfortable to touch. Today, the $100 billion trap. 7 ways Canada is secretly and systematically gaining economic ground on the United States. Let's get into it. Before we get to the list, let's establish something important. The United States and Canada do roughly $900 billion in two-way trade every year. That makes Canada America's largest trading partner, bigger than China, bigger than Mexico on some metrics, bigger than the entire European Union combined. That relationship is so deep, so intertwined, that most Americans just assume it's basically fine. Friendly neighbors, hockey, and maple syrup, no big deal. But in trade, familiarity is a vulnerability. Because when you're not watching, that's when the quiet moves get made. And Canada, one of the most sophisticated economic actors on the planet, has been making moves. 7 of them, to be exact. Number 7. The defense freeloader. Let's start with the one that should make every American taxpayer's blood boil. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed after World War II to create a collective defense umbrella, meaning if one member gets attacked, all members respond, and every member agrees to contribute. The benchmark? 2% of GDP spent on national defense. Canada's current contribution? Roughly 1.3%. Now let that sink in. Canada is sitting inside the most powerful military alliance in human history, an alliance paid for in large part by American soldiers, American tax dollars, and American technology. And they are not holding up their end of the deal. Why not? Because they don't have to. Canada knows that the United States will always defend North America. The geography makes it inevitable. No American president can let Canada fall. So, Ottawa does the math. We get full protection for a discounted price, and the Americans foot the rest of the bill. That gap, the distance between 1.3% and 2% of Canada's GDP, represents roughly $10 to $15 billion per year in defense spending that should exist, but doesn't. $10 to $15 billion a year that Canada funnels back into its own economy, while American taxpayers pick up the slack. They call it being a good ally. Economists call it a free rider problem. I call it one of the most elegant financial maneuvers in the history of the alliance.
Number 6. The green disguise. Here's how you crush a foreign industry without anyone calling it a trade war. You wrap your protectionism in environmentalism. Canada's ban on single-use plastics, rolled out in phases starting in 2021, was presented to the world as a climate-forward policy. Straws, plastic bags, food containers, gone. Noble? Maybe. But here's what the press releases didn't mention. American packaging manufacturers had spent decades building their business models around the Canadian market. Billions of dollars in cross-border exports, supply chains perfectly calibrated to Canadian retail requirements. And overnight, with the stroke of a regulatory pen, the rules changed. Now, if you're a U.S. packaging company, you have two options. Spend millions retooling your entire manufacturing line to meet Canada's new specifications, or walk away from the Canadian market entirely. Most walked away. Meanwhile, Canadian domestic manufacturers who had advance notice of the regulatory timeline had already begun adapting. They kept their market share. American competitors were frozen out. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a non-tariff barrier. It's the modern trade weapon of choice, technically legal, nearly impossible to challenge at the WTO, and devastatingly effective. You don't need to raise a tariff when you can just change the rulebook and let your competitor drown in compliance costs. Number 5. Starving the heartland. Let's talk about something personal. Something that hits American families at the dinner table. If you live in Wisconsin, New York, or Vermont, if you have a family member who farms dairy or poultry, what I'm about to tell you is going to make you furious. Canada operates a system called supply management. In plain English, it's a government-controlled cartel for dairy and poultry. The Canadian government sets how much milk, cheese, and chicken can be produced domestically, fixes the prices, and then, to protect that system, slaps tariffs of up to 298% on equivalent American products trying to enter the market. 298%. That's not a trade policy. That's a wall. Meanwhile, Canadian agricultural products cross into U.S. supermarkets essentially tariff-free because America believes in open markets. American farmers have been fighting this for decades. Washington raised it in NAFTA negotiations. They raised it again in USMCA negotiations in 2018. They won some concessions, a tiny slice of expanded market access, fractions of a percent. And Canada protected the core of the system almost entirely intact. Every year, Wisconsin dairy farmers lose an estimated $1.5 to $2 billion in sales they could be making in Canada, if the market were actually open. The heartland is being cut out, and Ottawa hasn't blinked.
Number 4. The housing crisis you didn't know Canada caused. You felt this one, even if you didn't know where it was coming from. Why does it cost so much to build a house in America right now? There are a lot of answers: interest rates, labor shortages, zoning laws. But there's one answer your financial news network probably didn't give you: the softwood lumber dispute. Here's the short version. Canada subsidizes its timber industry: crown land fees, government support, below-market harvesting rights. The result is that Canadian lumber enters the U.S. market at prices American lumber producers simply cannot match. American mills close. American loggers lose jobs. The U.S. fights back with countervailing duties, tariffs on Canadian lumber. Canada retaliates diplomatically. The whole thing goes to international trade tribunals. Rinse and repeat. This dispute has been running, in various forms, since the 1980s. The casualty? American homebuyers. When lumber tariffs spike, construction costs go up. Builders pass that cost to buyers. The National Association of Home Builders has calculated that the softwood lumber dispute has added over $30,000 to the price of a newly built American home. $30,000, on top of everything else you're already paying. So while politicians trade legal briefs across the border, ordinary American families are being quietly priced out of their own neighborhoods, and a significant portion of that price tag has Canada's name on it. Number 3. The energy chokehold. This one is a ticking bomb, and I genuinely believe it is the most underreported story in U.S.-Canada relations. It's called Line 5.
Line 5 is a 645-mile pipeline that runs from Superior, Wisconsin, through Michigan's Upper Peninsula and under the Straits of Mackinac, before continuing into Ontario, Canada. It carries roughly 540,000 barrels per day of crude oil and natural gas liquids. It supplies approximately 55% of Michigan's propane needs and feeds refineries across the Midwest. The state of Michigan, backed by certain political interests, has been trying to shut Line 5 down, arguing environmental risk from the underwater crossing. The Canadian government has invoked a 1977 bilateral treaty insisting the line must stay open. This is not just an environmental dispute. It is a strategic confrontation over who controls American energy supply. If Line 5 is shut down tomorrow, here is what happens. Fuel prices in Michigan and Ohio spike immediately. Refineries that depend on Canadian crude go into supply shock. Heating costs in the Midwest for real families in real winter go through the roof. Tens of thousands of jobs in energy-dependent industries are at risk. Canada controls the spigot, and they know with surgical precision exactly how much leverage that gives them over American energy independence. This is the definition of a chokehold, and America is only beginning to reckon with it. Number 2, the tech tax ambush. Here's where it gets brazen. In 2024, Canada implemented its digital services tax, a 3% levy on revenue earned by large digital companies from Canadian users. The target: Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, the crown jewels of American technological dominance. Ottawa framed it as a fairness measure, making tech giants pay their share. But the structure tells a different story. The tax applies almost exclusively to companies above $1 billion in global revenue, a threshold that happens to exclude virtually every Canadian tech company, while hitting American giants squarely between the eyes. The U.S. Trade Representative called it discriminatory. Washington threatened retaliatory tariffs. Trade officials delivered formal warnings. Canada's response? They implemented the tax anyway, and retroactively applied it back to 2022, creating an immediate multi-billion-dollar bill for American companies. That retroactive clause is worth pausing on. Canada didn't just tax future revenue, they reached back in time and extracted money American companies had already earned and already accounted for. It's aggressive, it's targeted, and it worked. Billions of dollars, extracted from Silicon Valley, flowing into the Canadian Treasury, while Washington was left holding a strongly worded letter. Number 1. The Chinese backdoor. America has spent years and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to contain China's rise in the global electric vehicle and battery supply chain. Massive tariffs on Chinese EVs, restrictions on Chinese battery technology, bans on certain Chinese semiconductor firms. The goal? Keep Chinese state-backed industry out of the future of American manufacturing. But China found a backdoor, and that backdoor is Canada. Chinese state-backed companies, including firms with direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party, have been systematically acquiring stakes in Canada's critical minerals sector: lithium, cobalt, nickel, the raw materials without which there is no EV revolution, no battery technology, no energy transition. In 2022 alone, Ottawa identified multiple Chinese acquisitions in the critical minerals space, and then, after initially raising concern, approved some of them anyway, citing economic development priorities. Let that land for a moment. While American policy is explicitly designed to block Chinese access to these materials, Canada, our USMCA partner, our closest ally, our integrated supply chain neighbor, is allowing Chinese capital to plant a flag in the resource base that feeds American industry. The cars might say made in North America, but if the lithium in the battery was secured by a Chinese state company operating through a Canadian subsidiary, what does that label actually mean? America built a wall at the port. Canada left the side door open. Here's the uncomfortable truth. None of this makes Canada evil. It makes Canada smart. Every single move on this list, from defense spending to digital taxes to critical minerals, is a rational actor pursuing its own national interest with sophistication and patience. The problem is not Canada. The problem is that Washington keeps treating the northern border like a non-issue, like a formality, like a relationship so old and familiar it doesn't need active management. That assumption has a cost, and you've seen 7 line items of it today. The question is not whether Canada is a friend, it is whether friendship means you stop paying attention. And based on the last decade of evidence, America has. Are we too dependent on Canada? Have we been asleep at the northern border? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. If this kind of analysis is what you're looking for, the real power moves, the strategic plays, the stories that don't fit neatly into a cable news segment, hit that subscribe button. This is the Oval Briefing. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and we'll see you in the next one.